the goal was to edge the tents forward about 50 meters every few weeks. So that actually seems like a scenario that if they did that with a level of discipline, I feel like that would be very hard for the Israeli forces to deal with. One thing I noticed as well from the Human Rights reports, they said that there were 29 militants in this period. The really weird thing about that is you can go to the Al Qassam Brigade's website and you can look through their list of people, of martyrs, of people who were in the brigades who died and what date they died. And you can look at this event on the 14th of May and you can find, do you guys know the longest time an IDF person has spent in jail for committing a crime against a Palestinian, for murdering a Palestinian? Okay. I have done way more research on this event than I ever thought I would have to, but we're here. The Great March of Return, 2018 up until 2019. So, my initial impression, I remember, it's good that I wrote this down. My initial impression of the Great March of Return was that there were border protests. The period that people usually refer to is the end of March 2018 up until the end of the year. So it's about like a 9-month period, not 6. There were marches afterwards, but they started to die down at that point. So the bulk of the events and the events that are mentioned in the human rights reports, that's all like end of March to end of December 2018. My impression was that you have tens of thousands of people, I think 50,000 was the highest date, of people who want to protest near the border fence all over Gaza, between Gaza and Israel. They want to approach the fence at some point, or they want to be near the fence and they wanted to set up tents and basically to protest their for their rights as refugees to return to Israel, or even just to get refugee rights, maybe in a more abstract way, and also to protest the blockade. These are the main concerns. And the impression that I had was that most of these protesters stayed fairly away from the buffer zone between Gaza and Israel. They stayed away from the buffer zone between the border fence and the interior of Gaza. So they're just setting up tents. They're doing festive activity is the word that keeps coming up. Like they were reading poetry. They were selling fucking food to each other. They were, yeah, like that's just that kind of thing. Like protests, talks, etc. And a small minority of people went towards the fence and started throwing stones, setting fire to tires. Later on in the protests, they would start throwing incendiary balloons and Molotov cocktails and incendiary kites over the wall. There were some reports that people had grenades, although not many, it seems. 1 or 2 people seemed to have guns. And the response from the IDF was to freak the fuck out and shoot at them. So basically, the IDF, with a fence and a bunch of barbed wire between them, firing at civilians who are mostly unarmed approaching the fence. This is the impression that I had of the Great March of Return. And at the end of this 9-month period, you have about, it says 200 plus dead. It was actually in this period, it's 183 dead. Many of them killed something like 300 meters away from the fence. Most of them unarmed, like almost all of them. And according to UN analysis, only one, by any standard, seen as either participating in hostilities or seen as a legitimate threat by policing standards. That's the impression that I had. So what I've basically came to at the beginning, just from absorbing the information from other people and talks and like skimming a bit here and there, the impression I had was that you've got the IDF expected more than actually came to them at the border. They probably expected more military weapons and more militant presence. They don't really get that much of a militant presence, but they react in the same way anyway. So they clearly disproportionately respond to what might have been a threat, but just not as big as the level of force that they used. And very likely that there were severe war crimes committed and no one prosecuted because it's the IDF. They don't prosecute people very often for crimes against Palestinians. So that's the initial impression I had. My position after reading these reports and various other sources is Not too different. It's a little bit different. So let's just talk about what happened. So the concept of the Great March of Return with that title uh, and this particular protest comes from January 7th, 2018. And on that date, a guy called Ahmed Abu Artema, a poet and journalist, goes on his social media page and just posts, "What if 200,000 demonstrators marched peacefully and broke through the fence east of Gaza and entered a few kilometers into the lands that are ours, holding the flags of Palestine and the keys to return, accompanied by international media, and then set up tents inside and established a city there?" Then he puts a hashtag Great March of Return. Um, that's the initial proposal. And honestly, in a vacuum, let's say in a vacuum, if you don't know anything about the history of Israel Palestine or the history of that border or about Hamas or anything else or the Second Intifada, you'd think that sounds like a good idea. That sounds like a refugees claiming their rights. That's what it sounds like. Obviously, if you know a little bit about the fact that this border between Israel and Gaza is not a border at all, it's an armistice line. It is basically a line that was drawn more or less based on where a few soldiers happened to be in 1949 on some day. It's been the site of constant military aggression back and forth between Fedayeen or between Israel and Egypt or between Israel and Fatah and then Israel and Hamas. Like it's been a very, very constant site. And settlers from Israel who used to live in Gaza, it's been a pretty fucking tense area, which is why the border is so militarized. So fortunately, that's not actually what the protest plan turned out to be. Things move on. This guy, actually, by the way, Abu Artema, I know this the whole thing about talking about cutting through the fence and peacefully breaking a militarized border fence sounds like a bit of a meme. This guy seems fairly sincere, actually, like the way that he was talking, because he, in general, was an advocate for a one state solution for two people. He believes in equal rights from the river to the sea between Israelis and Palestinians. He also actually was quite vocal about the idea that he didn't want the march to be to be combative. He didn't like the idea of even things like stones. He wanted to be a non-violent protest. He wanted it to be about a break from past confrontations. So if we go to the principles, how they evolved compared to this initial tweet, they have their principles. They talk about Resolution 194 quite a lot. They want to confirm that they are like a new form of resistance, different to conversations throwing stones. And the initial idea of just walking towards the fence and cutting through is more or less scrapped. They later on move to the idea that what they want to do is they want to sit like 700 meters away from the fence, because the Israeli buffer zone is 300 meters. And it's very clear because it's demarcated by a road that was built in 2015 called the Jakar Road. Basically goes along the border for Gaza, and it demarcates the 300-meter line more or less between the fence. So if you're on one side of the road, you're in the buffer zone. If you're on the other side of the road, you're in safe zone, right? So it's quite clear. These guys want to set up their tents a few hundred meters away from the road, so fairly far away from the fence. And the way that they envisioned doing it was that they wanted to have their tent set up, and the goal was to edge the tents forward about 50 meters every few weeks. So that actually seems like a scenario that if they did that with a level of discipline, I feel like that would be very hard for the Israeli forces to deal with. If people just unarmed, just walked forwards with their tents and just moved them a little bit every few weeks, I feel like the IDF would be in a very difficult position if they decided that they were going to shoot these people. Or if they did, it would have to be some kind of like crowd control or warning shot before people had the opportunity to run back. So that's the initial idea. And I think originally Hamas don't seem that interested in it because obviously it's a It's just not what they're used to. Eventually, though, they come on board because it seems to get quite a bit of traction. And by the end, you've got what's called a higher national committee overseeing the whole thing. And then there are 12 subcommittees, and it eventually pulls in representation from every organization, that basically everyone that matters in Gaza. So you've got Hamas, you've got Fatah, or what's left of Fatah in Gaza, you've got the DFLP, you've got the PFLP, you've got Islamic Jihad, but the armed wings, the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas and the Al-Quds brigades of PIJ and the whatever, again, what's left of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades in Gaza, they're not present. So the armed groups are not represented officially at all. There are subcommittees, things for like media, there are the elders and the honorables, there's like legal committees, there's students, there's popular activity, health, refugees, women, youth, folklore. So it's a pretty broad church organizing this protest. And they do reiterate in their messaging constantly that they're nonviolent. They reiterate that very, very often because, again, and they know that the media is watching them. They talk very much in that way. They want it to be very clear. Even in their 12 principles, they reiterate nonviolence like constantly. They set up 5 protest sites just in various areas along Gaza. So you got one in North Gaza, you got one east of Gaza City, you've got Central Gaza, Khan Yunis, and then down in Rafah, just all along the border with Israel. They set up what's called return camps, again, between 700 and 1,000 meters from the fence. So like almost a kilometer away from the fence sometimes. They name some of their tents after abandoned villages from 48. And they even level the ground because, again, Hamas is there, so they get the rights to do this. They level some of the ground to organize the tents. They organize bus travel. They give financial support to people who need it. I think they say, in accordance with the GMR principles, the activities set up at the return camps encourage people to attend the GMR while remaining far away from the fence. So again, the general direction of the HNC is to stay away from the fence. Okay? They set up sandbags to protect the tents. They actually have Hamas guys going around to inspect people every now and then to make sure they don't have weapons. So there's a little bit of a kind of air of MLK in these like initial like things that the public are being presented with, right? It seems like they want to be pretty far away from the buffer zone. They don't want to approach the fence. They don't want people to be armed. And what they're going to do to approach the fence is to move, 50 meters closer, right? Over a period of weeks. The coordinator of the subcommittees, the guy more or less at the top, is called Khalid al-Bash, who is a senior official of Islamic Jihad. Interestingly, the Human Rights Report doesn't care to mention that he's a senior official of Islamic Jihad, but again, he's a political guy. He's not part of the Al-Quds brigades, so distinction there. The reason I'm going to reiterate that is because laws around conflict, if you're a member of Hamas or Islamic Jihad, but not a militant, not part of the 2 militant wings, you're not a military target. You're a civilian, unless you do something to participate in armed conflict. Okay? So, this is the idea that they have. They have their messages out to the media. They have a Facebook page called The Great March of Return. They reiterate the importance of the peaceful nature. There are some exceptions, though. They do deviate from this message of what they want to do with regards to the fence. There are some social media posts, for example, one before the 14th of May, where they call on protesters to cross into Israel and they provide guidelines for how to do it. So there's a bit, but this is later on. This is before March 30th. So this is the idea, the gist. It's also actually quite unique in the sense that it's one of the Palestinian movements in Gaza, like under Hamas's watch almost, that has fairly strong
beer for me.
Participation from women. Thanks for the $20. I really appreciate that. I'm sure I will. Okay. So Israel looks at this and they're like, okay, this is new. This is a situation we're not used to. So they decide to let the world know that they are still party to an armed conflict with Hamas and Islamic Jihad mainly, with any like militants in Gaza, basically, with Al Qassam and Al Quds brigades primarily. They talk about how the previous wars of Cast Lead and Protective Edge have neutered Hamas to the point, or like weakened Hamas to the point that they have to pursue different tactics. They are very quick to state that this march is going to be a security threat. They say that the protests were being appropriated by Hamas in order to further attacks against Israel. They make accusations that Hamas were going to go in disguised as civilians to use civilian cover to attack the border fence and to attack Israeli communities. So they resolve that their main priority is to not allow anyone to damage or destroy or cross the fence. That's like their main thing. So what they do is along the border with Gaza, they deploy 100 snipers roughly and military units just around the border. They build these kind of like mounds for them to sit on. And I think for each protest site, you've got like between 2 and 5 mounds with a couple of snipers in each one. And then you also have like lookouts and you have commanders. Now, why that matters is because Israeli policy typically is if you're 300 meters away from the fence and you're armed, if you're within 300 meters, they can shoot you with live rounds. If you get to within 100 meters, they just kill you anyway. They can just shoot you with live rounds regardless. So they have their snipers ready. They have their lookouts. They have their commanders. And what they decided to do was that they were also going to create a category of what they called key inciters or key rioters. And to them, a key rioter or key inciter would be someone who was urging civilians to move forward, was egging on the crowd, or was like taking a leading role, or I think was identified as a militant. Apparently they have intelligence that they can do that, like whilst they're sniping, or it was to catch out people who were kind of doing things that would strategically help people approach the fence. So things like burning tires and moving them forward so that the smoke would obscure the people coming forward so that they couldn't be hit. That was the idea. So they have these standards. They claim to be acting both within like a kind of dual paradigm of law enforcement and armed conflict, meaning that they'll go by law enforcement because with a higher standard, like a higher threshold of when you can use violence, and then with laws of armed conflict because they think there are going to be militants present, and they also believe that there are going to be people who they argue are participating in the armed conflict even if they're civilians. So that's their standard. The way it works is that these bounds are between sort of like 80-ish meters away from the fence. So you've got like 80 meters, then the fence, and then the 300-meter buffer zone. They have rules, believe it or not, for when they're going to use crowd control methods or for using live rounds. They distribute leaflets around Gaza and give warnings to people saying that they shouldn't be liaising with terrorists or violent rioters. They destroy a bunch of agricultural land on both sides of the fence to prepare for the buffer zones and to prepare for to keep clear sight and everything. They build their earth mounds, 30 to 70 meters from the fence. They put a bunch of barbed wire coils on the Gazan side of the fence, but for 30 meters before the fence. They basically declare a no zone. They tell people that they're risking their life if they come into the buffer zone near the fence. They have their sniper units. Now, they are encouraged, at least on paper, to use less lethal means first. So they have permissions to use things like water cannons, to use skunk water, to use stun grenades, to use tear gas, to use what's called sponge grenades. Rubber-coated metal bullets is one of the things. And then eventually smaller live bullets, which are less lethal but are still lethal. They were often used. They were actually discontinued during the Second Intifada because they're actually just lethal for the most part at a close enough range. And then they have their snipers with their 7.62 ammunition, which is obviously very lethal. So the standard that they have, though, is no one can use lethal force. No one can use their snipers with live rounds unless they have approval from a commander in each one of these mounds. So if there's going to be any argument for someone using their live ammunition on people who did not cross the threshold necessary, it's not a bad apple issue. It is a commander allowed them to do it. They were given the go ahead. So already anything the IDF does here that is not actually like permissible in terms of armed conflict or policing, it's because a commander allowed them to do it. It's not because some crazy sniper just went off the charts, right? So these are the standards set in place. Israel has arguments for why there are limits to these crowd control techniques. For example, they mentioned that skunk water doesn't have an effective enough range. It can only be effective from 60 to 70 meters. It doesn't really have much of a radius of effect. They can do it with drones, but the problem with drones is they need to be refilled a lot. So with bigger crowds that are moving constantly, it's not particularly effective. But they still use it. They still use that. They use stun grenades. To some degree, they have tear gas. The problem with tear gas is that the wind in Gaza blows typically from the sea. So the problem with tear gas was that if you were on the eastern side of the border, which is the biggest part of the border, is that tear gas would just get blown back at you. But they still use quite a bit of it as well. It actually turns out, based on medic statements, that the tear gas they used was insanely strong. It was like apparently there are levels of strength for tear gas, and it doesn't seem like they were using anything light. So they have their crowd control techniques. They have their arguments for why they are limited, why they can only be used in like limited ranges, and why each one of them has their issues. Rubber bullets as well. The problem with rubber bullets is that they don't work at a particularly great range, but again, they are still employed. Quite a few people get injured by them at the end. So this is what we have in place. Their rules of engagement are that they will use non-lethal means, but because they have limited effectiveness, they will use potentially lethal force as a measure of last resort, is what they say. They decide that they don't see the demonstrations as purely civilian, but we'll get into that later. They talk about using a kind of like dual paradigm when they talk about IHL, basically treating it as both a conflict to which Israel and Hamas, etc., are party to, but also as a policing event. So they kind of see it as both, depending on which thresholds are crossed in each area. As for live rounds, that giving permission to shoot the key rioters and key inciters, I think unless they were within 100 meters, the general idea, I think, was the permission to shoot them at the legs, but we'll see. So when we look at what really happened, the Human Rights Report, and I guess in general, I think most people agree that there were three particular main days. Actually, really two. The two big events were the 30th of March and the 14th of May. 30th of March was the first day of the Great March of Return. And let's see how it went. So on the first day, there were about 40 or 50,000 demonstrators, mostly at the camps just like along the Jakar Road. And very early on, small numbers of people moved towards the fence. Some of them are just standing or sitting or lying on the ground. Others are throwing stones and burning tires. It's kind of what's... And then by 9 a.m., you start seeing the first use of live ammunition. 18 people are killed. The Human Rights Report does give you a few biographies about a few of these people and how they were killed. They tell you about one person who was just walking 150 meters away from the fence just on his own, and he's shot in the leg, and then I think it goes through one leg and hits the other leg and basically ruins both of his legs. So you get stories like that. But that's basically what you get from the Human Rights Report. You get 18 killed, 703 wounded. Doesn't seem like there was any indication of what you would call either an immediate threat to life or threat of harm under policing law, but you also, according to them, don't see any example of participation in hostilities. When you get to the events that happened between, because I guess people died in the first one, or just because more people got involved, you start to see people on the Palestinian side getting more aggressive. So now it's not just stones and tires and people approaching the fence. Now it's slingshotting. Now it's people taking tear gas canisters that were dropped and throwing them back at the IDF. Now there's people sending in kites and incendiary balloons that are basically setting fires across the fence. You have a few examples of people very strategically using smoke from the tires and directing it along with the wind so they can hide behind them and move forward in a very coordinated way. They have people who are ripping apart the barbed wire at the buffer area, like the 30-meter area. They have people cutting the fence as well. And what you also had was that there were, on social media, there were self-declared units dedicated to doing this. So you had units on Facebook and other social media accounts who were dedicated towards moving the tires forward to screen people coming forth. You had dedicated units for fence cutting. You had dedicated units for Molotov cocktails or incendiary balloons. Whether or not they were from any party or not is hard to say, but one member of these units actually told the UN Commission that they were supported by the HNC with money, that the organizers of this protest, who kept on insisting they were nonviolent, were actually giving people money and telling them where to fly their kites. Now, here you've got the problem, is that you've got Hamas, PIJ, etc., their political wings, not their militant wings, giving people instructions for how to attack the border fence, or giving people encouragement for how to attack the border fence. So you get into a more murky area. But we'll keep going. Because again, the UN Commission finds once more that members of the armed groups, they don't seem to have initiated any of these attacks at the times of the demonstrations. And they find that basically everyone who dies in this period again is not, or gets injured, is not participating in hostilities or posing any serious threat. The big event is on the 14th of May. This is the one where there were prior social media posts saying how to get through the fence, telling people to do it and telling people how to do it. You've got, prior calls on social media to breach the fence. They do say non-violent and unarmed. So, okay. The IDF puts out this massive warning saying that there's going to be 250,000 violent rioters. They're going to swarm Israel. They deploy like 11 battalions along the border. There are about 40,000 demonstrators, between 35 and 40,000. The Israelis get permission to shoot anyone armed across the 300-meter line. Again, anyone unarmed at less than 100 meters. They level the ground at the demonstration sites. So again, they can like have a very clear buffer zone between the border and the fence, between the road and the fence. So these demonstrators are much bigger. And again, very early at all of the demonstrating sites, you have people slinging stones, like slingshotting. You have people throwing stones. You have people burning tires. The barbed wire coils are ripped away again. You've got the fence actually gets breached at this one point where two people come through and set fire to one of the sniper berms, which is empty at the time, but they set fire. And then one is injured and the other one's shot dead as they're running back into Gaza. The ISF, which is the Israeli security forces, claim that grenades were thrown and the IEDs were thrown. The commission says that they couldn't confirm it. So, okay. And on that day, you have over 1,000 people are shot. And I think the number of deaths on the 14th of May, the biggest event for deaths, was 62 dead. 62. Lots of people throwing, so this is probably the most contentious one. And I think this is where I'm going to tell you where a bunch of the disputes are. The UN report said that in this day, there was one incident which may have amounted to direct participation in hostilities. And the example they have is that there were hundreds of people within the buffer zone, some almost 50 meters from the fence. You've got the usual stone throwing, tires, people approaching the coils. You have other people getting closer. And then you have a explosion of shooting from the ISF. A witness said it was indiscriminate and heavy. A bunch of men approaching the fence are targeted and a bunch of people are killed. And the reason this outbreak of gunfire happened from the ISF was that just before it seems that one person who's unidentified in civilian clothes was very close to a big group, was getting cheered on by the big group, and he was firing a rifle towards the Israeli side. About 50 to 70 meters from the fence, so very close, thick smoke, and then Israel responds with live gunfire, and then a bunch of people die. So what's interesting about this human rights report is that the way that they characterize this, because this, to the human rights report, is the one person who they say may have been participating in hostilities. They describe it here. The section on 14th of May, an incident that may have amounted to hostilities. So it seems to be that this attack on the border fence throughout these protests is only seen as participating in hostilities when one guy fires a rifle. That's where they get a maybe. One person. So that's where you start to get a bit of contention. So you have these protests, they go on, they start to die down a little bit more between sort of like October and December. And then by the end of December, this is the period they look at. They look at the end of March to the end of December, 183 dead. According to the Human Rights Report, they say 29 people, all in all, they say were members of armed groups. 29 members of organized armed groups. The standard that the commission uses, though, is that they don't believe in the concept of continuous combat function. They don't use that here. So they believe that if you are part of an organized armed group, you can't just get killed when you're doing whatever. You have to, you still be participating directly in hostilities. So that's their standard. You can't just like assassinate a Hamas guy like if they're walking by the like on the Jakar road on the border, right? They say you actually have to be doing something. And to them, attacking the border fence doesn't suffice unless you do it with a rifle, in which case it's a maybe, okay? So this is where there's a bit of skepticism, I think, on the UN report. So looking at what they've gone through, what I did was I looked at some of the sources that they mentioned for what constitutes direct participation in hostilities. Because as a layperson, I would have thought this is a militarized border on an armistice line. And I feel like that border fence is considered a military target both by the IDF and by Hamas. That's kind of what I would have imagined just like from instinct. Like on October 7th, you know, the first thing they did was they destroyed the fence to let people through on their motorcycles, as well as paragliding over it, right? So I feel like the border it's got a military purpose. When they talk about when this ICRC report on what constitutes participation in hostilities, I think they judge it as something that constitutes direct participation would be, it's regardless of whether or not you're a civilian or member of armed forces. It doesn't refer to affiliation or anything. And I think what constitutes it is they say that there are 3 criteria. They say that there's threshold of harm. The act must be likely to adversely affect the military operations or military capacity of a party to an armed conflict, or alternatively to inflict death, injury, or destruction on persons or objects protected against direct attack. So it's persons or objects. There must be a direct causal link between the act and the harm likely to result from either that act or from a coordinated military operation of which that act constitutes an integral part. And 3, the act must be specifically designed to directly cause the required threshold of harm in support of a party to the conflict and to the detriment of another, the belligerent nexus. So threshold of harm, again, it's got to be like likely, as in you could reasonably expect it. Now, when I think about the Great March of Return, I can see why it's a very difficult thing to judge, because the argument you would get from, I think even from the people who built this border fence, because if you look at the fence, not all of the fence looks like that, okay? This is like the shitty part of the fence, and you've got this many people like coming towards it. Other parts of the fence are more fortified than just this little like thing that you would expect to see in like a sports field, right? But the question is, why is that 100 or 300-meter line so precious? Like, why is the fence so precious? And I think there was an article I read in the New York Times about that gave a quote from the person who actually designed the fence, like the border fence or the organization that did. And it seems to be that if you think about it, let's say you've got like potentially a few thousand people either in or very close to the buffer zone, maybe tens of thousands of people not that far away from the buffer zones. If there's a breach in the fence and those people start running towards it, you have probably, if you're talking 100 meters, you've got like less than 20 seconds before they're at the fence. And if you go further than that, then you've got like what, like maybe 2 minutes from the buffer zone at most. You don't really have that long. And I think the fear from the IDF was that they didn't, or the ISF, sorry, is that they don't really want to have, because what do you do then? What do you do when you have like thousands of people potentially through the border and within Israel? Um, and you don't necessarily know how many of them are armed. It seems to be that some of them are, like with whether it's with like cold weapons, because the people were using machetes and like big knives to try and cut through the fence. Like that was documented as well. So that's where you get a bit more of a debate. And I don't really think the Human Rights Report even bothers to have it. They don't even consider it. Even though I feel like from the way that you interpret this, which they cite as well, that I got this document from them, it feels like there's a pretty strong case for the border fence being what they would describe as a protected target. Because if you're talking about international law, well, international law is that Israel it's their country. That's the country of Israel that has a right to defend itself from people who are like attacking it. So, but that doesn't make it, I don't think it solves the argument just yet. One thing I noticed as well from the Human Rights Report is they said that there were 29 militants in this period. The really weird thing about that is, and you guys have seen me do this for a few things now, is you can go to the Al Qassam Brigade's website and you can look through their list of people, of martyrs, of people who were in the brigades who died and what date they died. And you can look at this event on the 14th of May and you can find 25 of those deaths were people from the Al Qassam brigades. Not the party, Hamas, not the civilian part of it, the actual brigades, like militants. Like people who were involved in launching rockets and digging tunnels and building explosives, like anything like that, right? They even talk about like some of the descriptions they give you are like they advance towards a group of young men towards the wire, cut it, and then whilst pulling back was shot in the head. They give you like they even talk about to the point of people like literally egging people on and almost like leading other groups to go to the front of the fence. These militants in civilian clothing. During his participation, he always said to his peers, I want a bullet in my head to rise to the level of martyr to God. There's even one story here that's actually quite sad of one guy dying supposedly in the first row, according to Hamas's website. And there's a story about his mother begging him not to go because she knows that he's doing something that's going to get him killed. And he just says he wants the right to return. And that's like, he just gives it like this stonewall answer, apparently. And this is all in his biography, like on the Al Qassam Brigade's website. Like they've got biographies, they've got where they died, they've got what they were doing when they died, they've got what they did when they were in the brigades. You know, they've got these photos of them in their military gear and everything. This isn't just them claiming random people as martyrs. This is them claiming mujahid, like fighters. So the Human Rights Report says that there are 29 people who died for this whole 9-month period who were militants. But Hamas's website alone on one day gives you 25. If you add the Palestinian Islamic Jihad militant website, you get 3 more. One of whom was 16 years old. Actually, he might have been 15 because the Human Rights Report says he was 15. What they don't tell you ISF soldiers shot 15-year-old Ahmed al-Sher in the back of his head with live ammunition. He was throwing tires at this time. The commission did not pose an immediate threat of death or serious injury when he was shot. They tell you this, that he was 15, that he got shot. What they don't tell you, and what they don't tell you for quite a few of these biographies, is that he was a militant who was attacking the border fence. I think this guy was actually kind of impressive. This guy was in a wheelchair when he was approaching the border fence. He was an amputee from Cast Lead. So from Hamas and Islamic Jihad websites alone, you have 28 out of the 29 people the commission said were militants. And then possibly, this is only circumstantial evidence at this point, is you have quite a few other people who are buried, wrapped in not only Hamas flags, but Al-Qassam headbands from the 14th of May. I mean, this is dated in the 19th, but there weren't marches on the 19th because it's every Friday. Give him another one. Oh, there's a guy from the PFLP as well. The Daily Mail, fuck off. Yeah, this guy, day after 15th of May, this is his funeral with him with the PFLP headband and flag. So, again, that's more circumstantial evidence, but from the two websites alone, you got 28 out of the 29. And then that's not even to mention other dates where the Al-Qassam brigades had other people. The PFLP had another person, even on their website. Not to mention, if I go to Al-Qassam deaths that happened at Great March of Return protests, outside of these three key dates, you have this. And the number I got to in the end for either like high likelihood of being militants or definitely militants was about just under 30% of the people who died. There were a lot of people injured. There were like 6,000 people who were injured, mostly from gunshots to the legs. But the people who died, as in like the people who seemed to cross the threshold or seemed to be the ones that were considered the biggest threat, about just under 30% of them were militants, about 50 odd total. So not sure how they undercounted, because a lot of these people were like, almost all of these people were claimed on the day that these things happened, or the day after, or very shortly after they happened, not like months afterwards. So there's a little bit of poor intelligence, I think, from the Human Rights Report there. What they also don't mention in the HRC report is that very shortly after this main event on the 14th of May, when 62 people died, Hamas claimed 50 of them. 50 out of 62. So you got Hamas claiming 50 members, 25 of whom are fighters, PIJ claiming 3. You have a pretty disproportionate representation there. Now, I will say, Israeli intelligence goes a lot further than I'm going here. They go as far as to say that 80% of the people who died at the whole March of Return period were either militants or party affiliates. I can't verify that myself. I tried to like reverse image search a few of the bits of evidence that they provide, but Israeli intelligence, unfortunately, is kind of horseshit. At least these reports are. Like their advocacy is really, really bad. It's like they just give you things like PFLP website, and if you reverse image search, you can find this guy, but for a lot of them, you can't. They haven't archived anything. There's no hyperlinks. A lot of these Facebook pages are just dead. Some of them are very loose circumstantial evidence that they're just like, he seems to have been like a Fatah sympathizer, like an activist, but not really any idea. Some of them are claimed by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, of whom some of them are still going around in Gaza. But yeah, like I didn't go that far. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because being an affiliate doesn't make you a target automatically. What it might suggest, the representation of affiliates, at least on this one day that I was able to find, is that this seems to have been this attempt to cross the border fence and to actually attack the border fence and attack the troops was a Hamas project. I think there's enough circumstantial evidence to suggest that for at least some of the protests, at least much more so than is stated publicly. We do know that Hamas were encouraging people to go forward. I think if you look for Hania, who, by the way, during these protests in this period, can be seen standing giving a speech in front of a poster with Gandhi, MLK, and Nelson Mandela, the leader of Hamas. So that's good memes. We also do know that they were, at the very least, implicitly encouraging people to approach the border fence and to attack it, because there's one picture here of a very, very young child who became a bit of an icon because he very creatively wore a mask that had an onion plant in it, because onions help you against tear gas. So this guy is going towards the buffer zone or towards the fence and using an onion mask to defend himself against the tear gas. Very young guy, and he is rewarded by Hamas with this little photo op. So we know at least there's a little bit of encouragement, even for what looks like someone who's younger than 10, to go and do this. So that's kind of gross. So it feels like if you've got such a disproportionate number of the deaths, because again, like, I don't think 30% of Gaza are militants. I feel like it's quite disproportionate. It would seem to be the case that there was at least some level of discernment when it came to militants, or what they considered to be inciters, and what they considered to be civilians, because of how many militants cross the threshold proportionately for getting killed, not just shot, or not just wounded. And I feel like this is really odd, because this human rights report that is so negligent with talking about the participation of militants and seems to be so strange and like idiosyncratic in their understanding of the ICRC's guidelines on who is participating in hostilities. This is like the gold standard for talking about the March of Return, this 250-page document. And like, even if you look at what they do here, they'll do this constantly with these, because they do these little like obituaries for people who died. And they'll say things like, this guy, Tahir Madi, a 24-year-old from Al-Shtay refugee camp, the ISF shot him in the torso at approximately 12 p.m. when he was roughly 300 meters from the separation fence. Madi had been walking away from the fence towards the camp of return when he was shot. He died of lacerations to his internal organs. And then they obviously, for every single one, they say did not find a threat of immediate death or serious injury. But they don't tell you that this guy, Tahir Madi, is a Al-Qassam Brigade's member. See that? The date? 5th of May? No, 14th of May, sorry. And they do this with multiple people. I don't know why this is not like relevant information to them. And yeah, some of them actually have videos. Some of them have montages when they die. They got like a little martyr video. And again, not random party affiliates who are getting called martyrs. No, fighters. Mujahid, right? So, yeah, like, I think there's one of these biographies. Hang on. There's one of these biographies where they actually talk about this guy. This is a guy who died on the 14th of May as well. God willing, on the day of martyrdom, after he prayed the dawn prayer, our martyr went to work in the forces protecting the borders. And as soon as he finished work, he quickly went home to take off his military uniform and put on civilian clothes to go out and participate with his people in the millions of return and breaking the siege. As soon as he arrived, he was surprised by 6 bullets from the rifle of a hateful Zionist soldier, making him a martyr. Yeah, so we know that they did this. Like, this is Hamas's own website. Like, you can do this for multiple events. It's so strange. Yeah, they went into civilian clothes, and it seems to be that at least some of them were literally egging people on and inspiring people to join in the attack with them. And then at that point, you've got militants who seem to be intent on attacking the border fence, militants who are party to a conflict, and then you've also got civilians around them who are assisting them in doing it with like either by burning tires or by like having like an overwhelming presence or throwing stones and everything else, or throwing their kites or balloons. So the question becomes very murky of like, well, do they become targets as well because they're assisting? And it seems to be that if you can consider the first person to be participating in hostilities, then like the actual militant who wants to break the fence, then you would actually have to consider the civilians who help them, whether knowingly or not, to do it as militant, as participating in hostilities as well. And it's not the case that this report also does this really weird thing where they constantly tell you that they died when they were running away, that they were fleeing they'd approached the fence, but they get shot when they're running away. But again, that's if we're talking about IHL, that's allowed, unfortunately, because you don't become hors de combat just because you retreat. You become hors de combat if you retreat and then you resume your civilian activity. But just a retreat, like, because a retreat can be a tactical retreat, right? So, but again, like none of this is really reflected in the UN report, which is it's just so bizarre. And they even go a little bit further. They actually do something that, well, first of all, let's say one thing that they do right. Like they do correctly call out there was some misinformation that went around the March of Return from the IDF. Actually, there was misinformation around the death of. There were a couple of deaths that had misinformation surrounding it. I think the key event was this person, Razan al Najjar. So she was a paramedic who was killed in a protest on the 1st of June. And the IDF basically said that she was a human shield, and they show you a video of her saying that she was going to be a human shield for the protesters. And they say that she was actually, they use this little clip and say that she admits to being a human shield for Hamas. But the problem was that they clipped it out of context. And in the full context of what she's saying, with like the proper translation, she's actually saying that she acted as a human shield for injured demonstrators, as if she was there to help injured demonstrators. And so the IDF just lied about it. So there were a few other examples of that as well, but it was of that ilk when it came to some of the deaths, because the IDF, the ISF, they don't come without criticism. Far from it in this case, actually. There are quite a lot of killings in here, not just injuries, but killings, where it's very clear, I think, that these people were not participating in hostilities, or were not or could have been repelled with non-lethal means. There are people who are reported in the commission review that even some of them have like video footage apparently, so it's not like fake, that there are some people who are just like walking in the buffer zone on their own and getting shot anyway without warning shots. It also seems to be that there are some people who were just like not on the 300-meter line, or not within the 300-meter line, or just on the edge, but like 400 or 500 meters away, who gets shot and killed. There's like one guy who's just like sitting on a hill, or there's another kid who's distributing sandwiches over the other side of the road. So there are some instances where people are clearly killed when they are not doing anything of the like, whether it's policing laws or IHL. Like it's completely unjustified. And the problem is that, like I said at the beginning, this is not like a bad apples problem, because if anyone was using live ammunition, it was because a commander said that they could. So that's one problem. And the other is just, let me summarize. I think at the very least, it seems to be that around 30%, give or take, of the people who were killed at the Great March of Return, I think they were participating in hostilities. I think they were militants. They were clearly engaged in something that was a form of hostilities against the opposing army, the opposing country. They were attacking something that I think both sides clearly consider by their actions a military target. They were egging on other civilians to help them with it. Yeah, I think at least that kind of 30-ish%, maybe a bit less. They were clearly participating in hostilities. They were combatants, even if they were unarmed. You don't have to be armed to be a combatant. You can look it up. As for the rest, I think it's probably a mix. I think it's a mix of, unfortunately, some civilians who were caught up in either the mob mentality, or were party affiliates who were assisting the militants, or were just regular civilians who were unwittingly assisting the militants. But still doing things like providing cover for people to move forward, or hacking at the fence, or pushing through the fence, with some of them with like cold weapons. Definitely the person who had a gun. Like, okay. So in that case, but I think also in that second category, there's also people who were neither taking part in the attacks on the fence, nor were parts of armed organizations. I think quite a few people were killed here, did not do anything to deserve being seen as combatants. Like, they just didn't deserve to die. And unfortunately, with the IDF, the ISF, with Israeli soldiers, is that, do you guys know the longest time an IDF person has spent in jail for committing a crime against a Palestinian, for murdering a Palestinian? The longest they've spent in jail. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I know the highest example. Not sentence. It's about 3 years, yeah. For a participant in the Kfar Qasim massacre. They had a longer sentence, but they were out in 3 years. The IDF has a very real systemic problem where, I know why they do it. They feel like they're in a difficult situation, and they feel like they're fighting people who don't respect international law, who embed themselves within civilians, and their soldiers have to make very hard decisions, and they don't want those soldiers to be hesitant about making those bad decisions to the point that they'll endanger themselves and their own people. That's the justification they give, which is why they give so much leeway. But at the end of the day, you want to call yourself the most moral army, the most legal army in the world, whatever the fuck. Well, it seems to be very clear. It's very clear that the lack of repercussions allows people to get away with extreme excesses, like with what I would consider crimes. And unfortunately, we'll never know, because Israel did not cooperate with the UN report because they don't trust them. I can see why they don't trust them, but they didn't cooperate, and there's not going to be an internal procedure. No one externally is going to do it. It's just really, yeah, it's a shame. It's somewhere where there definitely should be improvement, because I feel like if they could, you can do this. I can't show it on stream because it's like killing someone, but you can see that incident. Fuck, who's got the name of the incident? The one where there's like a terror suspect or someone who's been apprehended, or he's already been hit, I think. It's like there's this Palestinian attacker who is literally on the ground, on his face, not moving a muscle for like several seconds, just sitting, just lying there. And this soldier pushes the people out of the way, gets his gun, and just shoots him in the face. And I think that soldier did not get convicted with murder. Yeah, the guy was down for minutes. Yeah, people in chat know the name. Elor Azaria. Yeah. It's very, very obvious that they do this. And it's a very serious, like, systemic issue that needs to get, that needs to go. 11 minutes. Okay. I'm just talking about the clip when I say several seconds, by the way. I don't want to what about this, but Hamas have zero repercussions before anyone starts selectively crying about Israel. I hope you don't think I've been selective, but anyway. Yeah, you shouldn't what about this, because at the end of the day, we're not allies with Hamas. My country is not an ally of Hamas. My country doesn't like Hamas. My country is an ally of Israel, though. And you know me, I love my Jewish friends, my Israeli friends. I'm like, fuck you, this, you need to sort this shit out. It's really fucking bad, because it makes you guys look bad as well. I know the March of Return, and the reason I did so much reading on this particular one is just because of how contentious it is and how difficult it is to actually have like a thoughtful discussion on it, because it's so easy to frame this protest, and the way that people frame it, it's so easy to frame this as just like civilian refugees doing this, going towards the border because they want to protest, they want to symbolically gaze at their lost homelands, and then the IDF, the satanic fucking sniper brigade, elite snipers, just pow 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 pow. Like, yeah, like that's the image I think that is portrayed by a lot of like far left media. That's basically what Ryan Grimm said about it. That was his summary of the Great March of Return. I'm like, what the fuck? But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean the IDF didn't do. It doesn't mean some of those snipers didn't seem to have done pretty horrible things. They do try to, and we know that they were capable of being more restrained, because in instances where they showed restraint, they showed it. They put it on their website. They showed instances where you have fairly large crowds, or not even, this is a smaller crowd, but they show you, for example, here, this crowd is not that big, and they're getting pretty close to the fence. And the IDF, in this case, ISF, fuck me. There are fires being lit. There are things getting thrown over, probably stones. And they use tear gas, even though under Israeli regulations, they have the right to kill these people, apparently. So we know that they're capable of it. And I think there's this one here, I think, that they show you. But it seems to be, I don't know why I keep saying it seems to be. It's the case that not every event and not every particular approach to the border was treated in this way. Like, this is a very large crowd. And I think even in some of these videos, you can see, I don't know if it's this one, there's one of these videos where you can actually see the warning shot on the ground next to the crowd, and then people start to run away. But this is like a pretty big crowd here, and it's not like these guys are dropping like flies. Again, there's like a level of restraint applied here. So we know that they're capable of it. Where did you find these videos? IDF website. But if you look through some of those biographies of the people who died in the HSC report, there's just no way around it. Like, it's just a lot of people got shot who did not need to get shot, let alone die. And I think that's just about everything we know about the Great March of Return. I mean, I could have gone into a million times more detail for this, because this is a pretty long research document. If this becomes a segment, I'll put this into the description. You can already get this online. I can even link it now. But yeah, that's where we are. I wish I could find that New York Times article from the person actually talking about the... Oh, it's here. No, this is a different one. Is this it? Oh, I think this is it. Because it was an interview with Bloomberg that they had. Yeah. The fence that separates Gaza's 2 million people from Israel is not the sturdiest of barriers. To penetrate Israel, a Gazan would have to get past a crude barbed wire barrier and cross a short distance, then get over a through a 10-foot high smart fence packed with sensors to detect infiltrators. If a crowd of thousands surged towards the fence, it would take about 30 seconds to cross, the contractor who built it told Bloomberg News. So they do have their like rationale for being very precious about the fence, and obviously October 7th kind of showed why that's the case, but yeah, it doesn't mean they didn't go, that there weren't pretty horrible excesses as well with no repercussions. Because I'm pretty sure the Israeli Supreme Court, I haven't read their take on it, maybe I will. The Israeli Supreme Court basically ruled that the IDF did like they did what they were supposed to, basically. Like they defended the border, right? I don't think any individual, I could be wrong. I don't think any individual snipers were ever pulled up, right? I don't think that was the case. I don't think there was any legal issue, or there might have been investigations, but I don't think anything actually came out of it in terms of the courts. I feel like not enough people know about this research method. It's just so fucked up. Like, I can't believe this is the second time a UN report has made pretty strong claims about the number of militants in a certain event, and just not acknowledged the fact, or not noticed, that Hamas literally put the evidence out there for them in broad daylight. It was the same with Cast Lead as well, the Goldstone report and all the other human rights reports in Finkelstein, etc., who agree that the police people who died on the first day of that war were civilian police, like basically all of them. But again, with that one, you go to Hamas's own website and you look at people who died on that first day of Cast Lead in those police stations, and you just get an incredibly long list of geezers from the Al Qassam brigades. All in these buildings. And again, that's also the Goldstone report. You can be an academic, you could be doing a PhD, and you can cite the Goldstone report as a legitimate source. Historians do this. Avi Schleim would cite the Goldstone report, because even though Goldstone walked it back, the other authors didn't. So you can cite this. You can say, you can write a PhD about how Israel massacred traffic cops in 2008. And Hamas's own website is saying, mate, no, they didn't. They massacred Al Qassam Brigade's fires, which isn't really a massacre at that point. Like, so look at it. These are just the ones that I correlated with Israeli intelligence, by the way. Not even to mention, so wild. But yeah, doing that with the March of Return as well. I will say for some of for that 30% figure that I get from the Great March of Return, it is give or take. There are some of these deaths that I think are likely, but mostly just based on circumstantial evidence. For example, that's like, this isn't even circumstantial evidence. This is just like, yeah, or that's not even that detail I wrote was wrong at the end. Like this person here was killed by a sniper shot. It's like there's a poster of them with an Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade's logo on it, so they might have made one for him, but this could have been like a LARPer who did it for him, you know, or like the Philistine News did this for him. But like that seems like possible that the guy was a militant, but again, participating in hostilities, it seems to be the case. But that one I left kind of like on the likely but not definite. There are other ones that are maybe less so, like the people, for example, who are not on the Al Qassam site but who were buried with Al Qassam headbands. I just put them as civilians. Like they might have been civilians who were participating in hostilities, but they were civilians. Yeah, at least based on what I could find. Same with like a guy wrapped in a PFLP headband. But I think when you go for like the high maybes and the definites, you get about 30%. I think if you take out the high maybes, if you don't trust me, if you just get the definite ones, which would be just the ones on the Al Qassam and the Al Quds Brigade's websites, you would get probably 27, 28% of them. Yeah. By contrast, Israeli intel said it was 31%. They are looking at a different time frame, but yeah, Israeli intel said that about 31% of them were militants. My research gets me to about 28, maybe 30 maximum. As for them saying that 80% of the people who died were militants, were party affiliates, I don't know. If you had been an IDF soldier, do you think you would have been better? Don't know. Could have been worse. That's why I'm not a soldier. Maybe I would have just sprayed and prayed and then done my 4 days in jail for manslaughter or something by the courts. Yeah, maybe. That's why I'm not a soldier. Okay. Well, there you go, guys. The Great March of Return. We'll maybe add to the research document in the future. You know, I'm always open to new things. It's not like I'm a historian writing a piece. I can change whatever I want if anything new comes out. I would like a definitive answer. I really want to. This ICRC report gives you lots of examples of military objectives that can be attacked that count as hostilities, but they don't mention a border fence. So I'm just like, I don't fucking know. Like they mentioned property, but I'm like, what kind of property? Did they mention property? Hang on. Objects. It's objects, they used to say. like objects protected against direct attack for the threshold of harm. And I'm just like, okay, what then? I really want the answer to whether or not the border fence definitely counts. Because we can have the moral argument all day. I can argue why I think it is, but at the end of the day, yeah, if any legal analysis can help me out there, who knows? Using the ICJ standards, can militants stop fighting temporarily, move about to advantageous positions and not be targeted, then resume hostilities? They are not orders to combat if they do that. No. Retreat is not orders to combat. If you are retreating to get a more advantageous position, you are still party to the conflict. You can still be killed, yeah. Is there a link to checking out the Obsidian doc? Yeah. I'll update that now. And you can go grab it. Let's see. I need to have this link available somewhere. A published obsidian.md/lonerbox. Okay. There you go. Oh, fuck. I meant to mention one more thing about the report. Okay, I guess we can just add this bit in here. Okay. Oh, shit. I forgot to add this bit. This was also just a bit of weird disinformation from the report. Hang on. Avi noticed this. So according to the Human Rights Report, 4 Israelis got injured, I think all by stones. No one died though. This is no deaths, no serious injuries either. But they do mention that one Israeli soldier was killed on a Friday while demonstrations were ongoing, but outside the protest sites. See the section on impact on southern Israel. And I think if you go to, what was the number for it? Was it 792? Why am I confusing it with the article? Oh no. I think it was 792. Yeah, 0.792. They mentioned this one, why they didn't count it. Wait, that's not 792. What? Oh God, where is it? The 20th of July? Oh, I know. Here it is. Here. On Friday, 20th of July 1918, a protest day, a Palestinian sniper shot Staff Sergeant Aviv Levy of the Givati Brigade while he was near the fence opposite of Kibbutz Kisufim. According to Israeli sources, he was shot from the line of houses in Gaza, located a few hundred meters from the fence. On July 25th, also near... Okay, so this is like the... But they say that this had nothing to do with the protests, even though it was on a Friday on July 20th. But I think there was a newspaper article from the time of this killing, Friday, 20th of July, near Kisufim or whatever the fuck. And I think they mention... On 20th of July, an Israeli soldier was killed by a sniper firing from Gaza. Another officer was moderately wounded by a sniper near Kibbutz Kisufim after troops arrived to disperse a violent demonstration by 20 Palestinian youths close to the border fence. So near this kibbutz, there is a demonstration on this day, but they don't count him as to do with the protest. Why didn't they do that? So... It seems like we have at least 2 Palestinians then, at least 2 of the people with guns now. But for some reason, they don't mention this. They don't count it in the report of the one guy who died, even though they died during a protest at this area. I just don't get. Yeah, it's weird.
Sorry if you already answered this. My YouTube app is weirding out. In the end, was the truth closer to the pro-Pal or pro-Israel propaganda?
Thanks for the $10, Eitan. I really appreciate that. I don't know. The pro-Israel propaganda is pretty bad. Pro-Palestinian propaganda is pretty inaccurate as well. I think it's hard because there's like the Arab propaganda, like you get Al Jazeera and all that, and then you got the Western pro-Palestinian. I think for the history, I think when you're, say, compared to, I think there's maybe a bit more disinformation on the pro-Palestinian side than the pro-Israeli side. As far as disinformation, yeah, I think so. As for moral clarity, I, I don't. Maybe the other way around. I don't know. But it's hard because pro-Israel, that's like mainstream pro-Israel or like liberal pro-Israel, or I feel like that's the mainstream. But there's also, I don't know if it's all. There's so much like far right or very like right-leaning Israeli history, which is bullshit as well. So yeah, I don't know. It's really hard. I also meant to mention that on the 30th of March, 18 people died. Again, the human rights
Great
report.
work with the research. Also remember to pack some potatoes for the long flights.
Wow, thanks for the 20 Canadian, Java. I really appreciate that. Yeah, even here, the human rights report, again, didn't mention that there were, of these 18 deaths, of like at least seven or at least six or seven of them were militants, maybe eight. Al Qassam brigades claimed five. Islamic Jihad claimed one. DFLP had one, seen as a prominent leader, and even the Al Aqsa Martyrs Brigade claimed one. And then after this event, Hania was like, we'll break down the walls of the blockade, remove the occupation entity, and return to all of Palestine. So it's like, yeah, this is, again, it's a fairly disproportionate amount of people who are aligned with militant groups. Even if you take the conservative estimate of just like the six from Al Qassam and PIJ, like 6 out of 18, like a third of the people getting close enough in civilian clothes to get killed. Is that just a coincidence that many of them were? Yeah, no, obviously not. So yeah, I don't know. People are just, it's just fucked. Because I know that History Speaks guy tried to say that there wasn't really a strong Hamas or militant presence on the first day, that they just started coming in afterwards. That's not true, though. And again, their own websites contradict this. Even if it's just Al Qassam and PIJ, that's a very disproportionate amount of people who are protesting who are militants, like 33%. And then you mentioned the DLP, Al Aqsa Martyrs. Yeah, I don't know. Just it's a very brain damaged conversation. Ugh. How many people killed on the first day did you confirm as militants? 6, definitely. 8, if you want to count in the possibly ones, out of 18. Ali, thanks for the 5 Canadian. What would you do differently if you're running the ISF? Um, I don't know if it was the ISF policy, because it seems to be that they were following, like they were using crowd control even when people were really close. I want to know why those commanders were giving the go ahead to shoot people who were just walking around on their own. I don't really understand that. And more than 100 meters away from the fence. I feel like it would be a question of repercussions for people to do that. I like how this 4-stream long arc was triggered by History Speak saying you hadn't researched this. This is why you're a really good content creator. Oh. It's so funny that just like reading that report and reading all the shit that he missed out, and also reading just extra stuff again, and even just like thinking about it for a minute, like how mangled that guy's perspective is on it. Why do you think Hamas is incentivized to torpedo peaceful protests? Is it about religion, ideology? Really, they're after justice, or just about cash and corruption? I don't know. I think they thought they would get more attention if people died, or if there was like more for the cameras to capture. Maybe, yeah. Like there were a couple of people on the Al Qassam Brigade's websites who, before they die, are on social media like saying they know they're going to die. Can we get Benny Morris's opinion? Yeah, sure. Many Boris. Let's see. Oh, did they have a segment on it? Did they segment this? It's hard because it's not like a full. It was a short timestamp, wasn't it? They didn't talk about it that much.
Okay, answer. In 2018, there was the Great March of Return in Gaza. By all reckonings of human rights organizations and journalists who were there, it was overwhelmingly nonviolent.
But organized by the Hamas.
What whoever organized it,
Organized by
it was-
Satan. Let's start
Satan,
with
No,
yeah.
by Hamas.
Okay,
by-
Satan.
yeah.
I agree. Let's go for the big one. The big Megillah. It's Satan. Okay?
The big Megillah.
Overwhelmingly organized, overwhelmingly nonviolent.
Yeah.
Resembled at the beginning the
threw
first
bombs here and there,
first Intifada.
they threw
Represent
bombs
the
here and
first
there, yeah.
okay, not bombs. But
They
let's
tried to make
okay.
holes in the fence.
Okay,
obviously.
Let's continue.
Yeah.
So,
But I'm not sure Israel behaved morally in that
okay,
respect.
okay.
No,
but
no,
you-
no.
Okay, wait.
I'm willing to grant you that.
Please.
Oh, he actually said.
allow-
I didn't know he said that.
Allow me to.
You don't have to pursue
allow
it
me.
'cause I'm willing to grant
allow me
that there was-
to
I
finish.
don't know anything about this. I'd like to. hear.
Okay, so as you know, along the
He said he didn't. For anyone who didn't hear, it because Finkelstein's screeching over him. He said that he didn't think that the. What did he say? He didn't believe the IDF acted morally in that situation, or he said he wasn't sure.
Gaza perimeter.
pursue
Allow
it
me.
'cause
Okay,
I'm willing to grant.
allow me.
that
Allow
there
me.
was-
Willing to
please.
grant.
I'm willing.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
So.
But I'm not sure Israel behaved morally in
Not
that
sure.
Okay.
respect.
Okay.
No,
but
no,
you-
no.
Okay. Wait.
I'm willing to grant you that.
Please. Please.
I'm willing to
Allow
grant
me.
you.
Allow me to.
You don't have to pursue
allow
it
me.
'cause
Okay.
I'm willing to grant.
allow me.
that there
Allow
was-
me
No,
to
I
finish.
don't know anything about this. I'd like to. hear.
Okay. So, as you know, along the Gaza perimeter, there was Israel's best trained snipers. Correct?
I don't know best trained. There were
But-
snipers.
Fine.
Snipers.
Okay. All right.
The
Because
editorializing
hey,
support.
laugh. It's hilarious. The story's so funny.
You're lying about the
It's
Great
so
March of Return
funny.
had aspects
Okay.
of violence to it.
Okay.
According, even the UN says it themselves.
Okay.
But you only collect what the UN says that you like.
See, the problem, Mr. Morelli, is you don't know the English language.
Uh-oh.
You don't
I can read from the
if you're
UN
here-
Oh God! Can we just talk about the March of Return? I want to hear what they said. Is
I
that all
said
that we
the
got
Great
from
March
it?
of Return,
Please
they said,
stop with your
while the
idiotic-
vast majority of
with your
protesters
idiotic-
acted in a peaceful manner,
No, listen to
during
what he
most
said.
protests,
Just-
dozens have
did you
approached the
just
fence,
agree with
attempting
me,
to
Mr.
damage it,
said there was
burning
moral
fires,
Did I
throwing
say
stones, and
overwhelmingly
Molotov cocktails
nonviolent?
towards Israeli forces, and
Okay.
flying incendiary
Okay.
kites and balloons
Okay.
into Israeli territory.
Yeah.
The latter resulted
Yeah,
in
but-
extensive
but you
damage to
don't-
agricultural
yeah,
land and
okay.
nature reserves inside
Okay.
Israel, and risked the lives
Yeah,
of Israeli
because
civilians.
Mr.
Some incidents of
Mr.
shooting and throwing
Borelli-
of explosives
Yeah,
were also
talk
reported.
fast,
I'm
so
just
people
trying to-
think that you're coherent.
I'm just reading from the
Okay,
UN.
Yeah, but you see,
I know you like them sometimes,
you got
only when
the
they agree with you,
You
though.
got the months wrong. You got the months wrong. We're talking about the beginning in March 30th, 2018.
You just described that
This is
march.
why it matters. The beginning matters because, again, in the beginning, at least a third of the people who died were militants. It was not the case that. It seemed to me that the kites and the balloons came later, like in later dates. But at the beginning, again, there was still a militant presence. The idea, what they were trying to do was still the same. Finkelstein wouldn't know that, though, because the Al Qassam Brigade's website is not a human rights organization. And the human rights organizations don't seem to care that Hamas publishes this shit for the world to see. By the way, if you read this, both UN reports, both the summary and the full 251 pages, none of them mention a single militant that died here. They don't name them. Somehow, actually, they do list a bunch of obituaries or a bunch of paragraphs for the people who got hit or died, but they somehow, actually, with almost impressive precision, just managed to dodge mentioning any of these guys. They don't mention them. They just mention like the civilians. I think they list like 6 or 7 people who were either shot or killed in this report, but they just somehow managed to avoid each of the militants. Almost as if they did it on purpose. I don't know. I can't say that for sure, but like that was conspiracy brained. But in any case, they didn't do their due diligence. Because if you just read the UN reports, you would think that everyone who died was a civilian on the first day. And the Hamas only got involved later. You would think that. You would not know. You'd have no way of knowing that Hamas claimed 5 people, that Islamic Jihad claimed one of the people, that DFLP claimed one of the people, and that the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade might have claimed one of the people. Because I think this battalion, this Shahid Nidal al-Amudi, they never stopped. They, again, Fatah are a very broad church. They have a lot of like kind of groups that are more sparse and disorganized, but I think this group here, they never actually stopped operating, even in limited capacity. So anyway. Oh, I'm so glad he mentioned that, because now I know. Now I know the importance of the, yeah.
Which is mostly peaceful.
Okay, allow me to finish. So there were the snipers, okay? Now you find it so far-fetched. Israelis purposely, deliberately targeting civilians? That's such a far-fetched idea. An overwhelmingly non-violent march. What did the international investigation...
It wasn't a march, it was a campaign,
yeah,
which
whatever
went
you want to
on
call
for months.
Whatever you want to call
For months.
Yeah. What did the UN investigation find?
Well, he just read it to you.
I read the report. I don't read things off of those machines. I read the report. What did it find? Brace yourself. You thought it was so funny, the idea of IDF targeting civilians. It found, go look this up on your machine.
I already know what you're going to say. You're going to say it found that only
children,
1 or 2 of them were justified killings.
Targeted journalists, targeted medics, and here's the funniest one of all.
Funny.
It's so hilarious. They targeted disabled people who were 300 meters away from the fence and just standing by trees.
This is true. If what
If it's true,
If what you're
Wait,
saying is true.
No, this is true. Like, again, you can look through the report, and they say they've got video footage, although I couldn't find the actual video footage, probably because people dying. But yeah, there were people who died who were not doing dick all. Now, whether that's because like they were firing through smoke, or like a missed bullet goes, or just because some psycho sniper with approval from a psycho commander just decided to fire at people who were like on the Jakar Road. Like, yeah, I don't know, but it does. Like, I think I'm putting it more to the likelihood that, yeah, there like some of these killings were just murders. I think, like, I think that's probably fairly easy to say. But yeah, the fact that he mentions that at least one. I can't. This guy, man, there's balls of steel. This guy went right to the front in a wheelchair. This Al-Quds Brigades dude. And again, the Human Rights Report, I don't know why they didn't see this, because actually, this was the PIJ website. They claimed them on the day after. They put out a little spread on their front page. Archive. Oh, wow, awesome. Yeah, they claimed them on May 14th, on the day. They returned 3 martyrs. One of whom was amputated in the front ranks. Yeah, in his wheelchair. He went to the front row in his wheelchair. A fucking militant. There is a video somewhere. I wonder if it's the same guy. There's a video of a guy in a wheelchair, like, slinging a stone. Like, using a slingshot. But anyway.
Pause. I think everything was fascinating to listen to, except the mention of hilarious. Nobody finds any of this hilarious. And if any of us are laughing, it's not at the suffering of civilians or suffering of anyone. It's at the obvious joyful camaraderie in the room. So I'm enjoying it, and also the joy of learning.
Lex.
So thank you.
Can we talk about the targeting civilian thing a little bit? I think there's like an important underlying, not necessarily that. I think it's important to understand. Yeah, I think it's important to understand. There's like 3 different things here.
That was all they spoke about March of Return. But that's the problem, is that like if you get Finkelstein if Finkelstein just has, if he's your only source, how much do you miss? I don't think he said anything about the Human Rights Report that was wrong. Or even about the event that was wrong. It was all correct. It's just, it's so conveniently left out fairly important parts of the story. Apart from when he says overwhelmingly nonviolent or whatever. Like, you can say that. You can say that, again, the vast majority of people did not move to the front. They stayed on the right side of the road. They didn't want to go onto the buffer zone. Like tens of thousands of people chose not to do that. And actually, when it seemed very clear after the 14th of May, when it became clear after the 14th of May and Hamas claimed 50 of the people who died out of 62, it was after here when the protests just started to die down because people were not interested in becoming part of this project. Like most people, the overwhelming majority of people who went to the March of Return did not want to even peacefully approach the fence. They just wanted to do their thing on their tents and wave their flags and make their statements about Resolution 194 and about the blockade. And you know what? That's actually based. They have every right in the world to protest about that. Like, and actually, if they had done it that way, and if the rest of the people had done what the majority did, you would have had a very different story. But that when people talk about the Great March of Return, vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis the IDF, well, then they're not talking about the mostly peaceful people who stayed on the right side of the road. They're talking about the minority, which sometimes amounted to thousands, but not usually a minority, always a minority, who didn't do that, who went and attacked and fought with the IDF. These are two different events, basically. They're two different dimensions of the event. And it seems to be that the confrontation part of it was disproportionately the idea of Hamas and other groups. Like that's what they wanted to do. The people who were not Hamas, etc., they just seemed to want to stay on the right side of the road, go to their tents, take their kids out and listen to poetry and listen to talks and play music. That's what they wanted to do, right? Talk to the media. And it seems some people, innocent people, I think, maybe wanted to, it seems like some people wanted to go and plant flags like on the edge of the buffer zone or a few meters in just to make a statement or to flip off the soldiers. And they got shot as well, which is horrible. Like they shouldn't have got shot. I don't think that was very moral of the IDF. Not convinced. But anyway, you know my take. Anyway. Okay. All right. Love you guys. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed my research. I hope you enjoyed my notes that are there. I will see if I can get it to a segment. Who knows? Maybe I'll redo it and you can watch me do it all again. Much better the second time and much better. Okay. Right, fuck off.